Happy afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to the webinar today. I'm excited to talk through some of my favorite topics as it relates to financial planning. My name is Jordan Patrick. I'm a dad and husband and financial advisor here at Commas. During the day, I get to spend time working with families to help them understand how to use their resources to create a meaningful and ideal life. We dive into those things. We get to talk through some technical aspects of financial planning as well, like how do you save for retirement? How do you save up for the dream home you want to buy? How do we find ways to save on taxes over your lifetime? Really dig into those details. But at the end of the day, it's all about figuring out how to create a life that's meaningful for you and allows you to make progress towards your financial goals. And so again, today is all about optimizing your finances and making sure that you are in the best position possible to allow your family to make progress towards their financial goals. When I looked at the definition of optimize, that's a word we use often, but really wanted to understand exactly what it meant. And the definition is to make the best or most effective use of a resource. And so that's what we want to do, is talk through how do we make the best or most effective use of your financial resources for the benefit of your family. And so we'll walk through three big ideas today. The first will be casting a vision and setting financial goals. The next will be automating your finances. And then we'll talk through 5 of the top financial planning opportunities I'm seeing right now for growing families. And so the first item here is casting a vision and setting financial goals. The core of financial planning is knowing what you want to optimize for. If we're trying to set ourselves up for success, what does success even look like? A lot of times I'll start working with families and we'll start talking about goals and what they want life to look like. And you'll hear some of the typical answers. You'll hear that we want to buy a new car in a few years. We want to upgrade our house down the road. We want to go on the annual vacation. Those things are all great, and they're probably really necessary for each of your families. But I urge the couples and families I work with to dig a little bit deeper. What we want to do is find a vision, find goals that are meaningful enough that your entire family is willing to rally behind them and make progress towards achieving those goals by working as a team together. And so how do you do that? The best way I found is just to start asking yourself some questions. So get with your partner, get with your spouse, get with a friend, and just open up some time for conversation. Here are a few questions that you might want to spend time asking each other. The very first one is one that I typically will kick off meetings with clients in order to just kind of break the ice and get ideas flowing. And that will be something along the lines of, what is the best thing that you spent money on in the past 6 months? That might be an experience that you paid for. It might be an item that you purchased. It might be something that you paid for as a service that helps your life be a little less chaotic and a little bit more convenient. Whatever it is, those items can start giving you clues as to what is meaningful in your life. And that's the goal for all these questions, is really to say, hey, what matters as we look at what we want life to look like in the future? The last 3 here get a little bit deeper, so be ready for that. But they're ones that can really open up doors to what you want your future to look like. And so the first one you might ask is, imagine that you're financially secure with enough money to cover your needs and wants both today and in the future. What might life look like? You could go a layer deeper and say, now imagine a doctor tells you that you only have 5 to 10 years to live. The good news is you'll never be sick. You'll never be in any pain. You'll have time to enjoy life. What will you do with your remaining time? And then a deeper question might be, imagine you now go to the doctor and they tell you that you only have 24 hours remaining to live. What dreams might go unfulfilled? What will you wish that you would have done? Again, these are deep questions, but they can really help you understand what matters most in life. Maybe there's a business idea that you've been thinking about for years, and if you got to the end of your life and hadn't pursued that, it would be a regret. As you're asking these questions, start to identify themes and start writing those down. Maybe you see a theme of travel and adventure and family. And as you're writing down the themes, begin to use those themes to create specific and tangible goals. So in that case, you might say, hey, we really value as a family this travel, adventure, and spending time together. So what if we set the goal to go every year on a family vacation to a national park where we're spending time together as a family for a week, engaging in lots of different activities and adventures. And write these things down. As you're working through it, it is really easy to get 6 weeks out, 6 months out, 6 years out, and forget what we're working towards. We're very forgetful people. So write these down, put them in a place where you can regularly revisit them, and remind yourself why you're taking the actions you're taking. It is so that you can make progress towards your financial goals and ultimately towards the life that you want to create for you and your family. And so with that exercise, dreaming is fun. At the end of the day, it's not that hard. It's pretty easy for most of us to come up with at least some idea of what we might want life to look like in the future. The hard part, though, is how do we not let today get in the way? And so if we ask the question, what gets away of preparing for the future? The answer is always the present. Life happens, curveballs get thrown at us, we need a new roof, our car breaks down. There are constantly things that get in the way of allowing us to set aside money and resources that will allow us to make progress towards our ideal life. There's also a concept called the future self. And this concept essentially says that our brains are wired to really only worry about today. If your brain tries to identify with who you will be in the future, your brain cannot make that emotional connection, and you actually see your future self as a stranger. It makes it really hard when you're trying to set your future self up for success. So what are a few tools that you might use in order to help make that emotional connection with your future self and help motivate you to take the actions that you actually want to take? Here are a few simple tools that you could use to help get a little bit of motivation. The first is to create vivid visions. And so a lot of times I'll hear a goal that sounds something like, I want to buy a vacation home when I retire. That's great. That's a noble and meaningful goal. But listen to how this one is different. I want to buy a lake house in 10 years on the lake that I went to with my parents every year growing up. I want the living room to have a fireplace where my family, my kids, my grandkids will sit around 3 times a year. We'll be laughing and telling stories about our childhoods. That vivid vision is very different than the initial vague goal. And it's that emotional connection that's going to allow you to be motivated to make progress. Another tool is to name your accounts. And so most banks these days will allow you to actually edit the title of your account. And the more specific you can get with that title, it's a psychological trick to help you make progress towards that goal. For example, if you have a goal of going on a Europe trip in a couple of years and you're really working to put aside money for that goal, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be willing to pull money out of that Europe trip account to fund something less meaningful that may not be as important. This also serves as a constant reminder every time you log in and look at your accounts as to what you're saving for and what you're trying to make progress towards. Another tool is to identify the villain. And so here you want to ask what in your life is opposed to the goal or vision that you're pursuing. Maybe it's that when you get stressed, you tend to binge shop, or that when big financial decisions come up, you tend to avoid them. There's oftentimes something, whether it's an internal cause or an external cause, that is opposed and will lead us astray from the thing that we're actually trying to pursue. The key here is if you can name that thing and come up with a strategy for what to do when the villain pops up, you're going to be in a better position where you'll be able to overcome it when it inevitably appears. And the last one is a fun one. There are a lot of AI tools out there today that will allow you to do this, and it's a concept called digital aging. And so for me, it's really hard to think about what I might want life to look like in 30 years. But when I can look at this future version of me, this picture of my older self that looks a lot like my dad, it's a little bit easier to see an older man who is wanting to spend time with his kids and his grandkids and wants to make sure that he has the time and financial flexibility to be able to provide for them. And so those are some strategies to stay motivated, but how do you actually make tangible progress towards these goals? Personally, I've found that I'm not motivated or disciplined enough to go in each month and say, okay, I want to buy that lake house. Let me move a little bit of money over every month into the savings account that I'm using in order to make progress. And really, we need a tool and a system to help us do that. And so automating your finances is really the best way I've found to actually continue to make progress towards your goals. There's a great quote by James Clear that says, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." And while those tools that we talked about a minute ago can get us hyped up about our goals and get us really excited for them, at the end of the day, that excitement is going to wear off, and we need a system to help hold us accountable and make sure that we're continuing to make progress towards those things. And we'll be thankful down the road that we did. And so a basic financial automation system might look something like this. Most people that I encounter have this first one in place. And so typically people will get a paycheck from their jobs. And if they're saving for retirement, they will have told their employer, hey, I'd like to hold a certain percentage to be set aside to put in my retirement account, my 401k, for example. And so because you've set up this contract with your employer, they might hold 5% every time you get paid and put it over into your 401k for you. You don't think about it. You made the decision once, and then you never have to think about it again. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with automations. And so we want to see how can we carry out that idea into the rest of your financial life. And so, for example, you may have had some money set aside into your 401k. The remainder of your paycheck will ultimately end up in your checking account. And then what I often see is clients will come to me and they've just allowed a lot of cash to build up in their checking account. They might have an idea that some of it is earmarked for a trip, some of it is earmarked to pay taxes, a number of things, but it's really hard to see what that breakout looks like when it's all just sitting there as a big lump sum in that account. And so by using various accounts and creating automations around those accounts, you can really help your mind to understand how your money is working for you in terms of making progress towards specific goals. And so you might, for example, set up high yield savings accounts to start making progress towards things that you're going to be spending money on in the next year or so. We'll talk a little bit more about high yield savings accounts in a minute, but just think of them as buckets that you can fund for expenses that are about a year out. And so this might look like travel, for example. Let's say that you want to go on a $6,000 trip in 12 months. Well, we could do the math to say $6,000 divided by 12 months. That means I need to be putting aside about $500 per month into an account that is labeled as travel, and it's earmarked specifically for that. Most banks, really, I would assume all banks today, will allow you to create automations within their platforms. So you could then log into your bank and say, hey, on the first of every month, move $500 from my checking account over into my high yield savings account that is for travel. You could do this for any expense that's going to be coming up throughout the year, but maybe doesn't happen on a regular or recurring basis. Gifts is a big one that I often see here. People know that they want to spend a decent amount of money on gifts at the end of the year. And when the time comes, it usually will blow up people's budget. Because maybe you spend $1,000 or $2,000 on gifts, and you weren't used to doing that throughout the rest of the year. So setting aside these monthly amounts on an automated basis will allow you to smooth out your cash flow and allow you to know exactly where to go to get the money when the time comes to pay for these things. You can do the same for other investment accounts. If you know that you want to be saving for your child's education, for example, you might open a 529 account, and we might work together to determine that you need to be saving $250 per month in order to fund your child's college. Well, again, like I said, me personally, I'm not disciplined enough to go in each month and set up and manually make that transfer. So setting up an automation will allow you to make progress. And what's so great is you'll be able to look back over time and say, wow, I didn't have to think about it. I'm looking at this account now. It's been invested and growing for me over time, and it really required very little effort on my part. And you can do the same for your bills and your spending. Make sure you have a system where your credit cards are being automatically paid off each month. Any loan payments or debt that is out there, be sure to enroll in automatic payments. Really any bill today should be able to be set up on some kind of automatic payment where, again, the thought is don't have to think about it other than once when you're setting up the initial system, and it's going to make sure that you don't run into any fees or penalties for missing bill payments, but more importantly, that you're making progress by setting money aside for the specific goals that you've identified. And so now let's transition to talk about 5 of the top financial planning opportunities that I'm seeing for growing families. Oftentimes, when I'll start working with a new family, there are themes and common opportunities that I'm seeing right now. And so I just want to dive in and talk through a few of those. The first opportunity that I see is high yield savings accounts. And I mentioned this on the previous slide. A lot of times clients will come, they'll start working with us, and they'll have a lot of cash built up in their checking and savings accounts. I think cash is important to make sure that there's enough there for an emergency fund or for any goals that you're going to be spending money on in the next year or two. But the key here is, how do we optimize that cash so that it's at least working for you a little bit? And high yield savings accounts are a great opportunity for that right now. Typically, your checking accounts will pay you 0% interest, and most savings accounts at big banks might pay you something like 0.01% interest per year. So you might get a few pennies when you look at your statement. That's great, but it's not meaningful. Many banks right now are offering these high yield savings accounts, and they're typically at the present time paying about 4.5% to 5% per year in interest in order for them to hold on to your money for you. And so any cash that is going to be sitting aside for any amount of time, I recommend using one of these accounts. I tell my clients, you're not going to get rich using a high yield savings account, but if money's going to be sitting there, you might as well earn a little bit of interest on it. 2 of my favorite banks for high yield savings accounts are Ally Bank and Betterment, but there are a number of them out there. You can just Google high yield savings accounts. The key here is to find a bank that has no minimum. So you don't have to have a certain amount of dollars in the account in order to get the higher return on your money. And you don't want a bank that's going to impose any fees for withdrawing funds or making any kind of changes. The next opportunity I see is the use of a health savings account. A health savings account is a special type of account that you have access to if you have a high deductible health plan. So not everybody can access a health savings account, but look into it, see if you're on a high deductible health plan. And if you are, the way that many people will use a health savings account or an HSA is that they'll put money in this account. You get a tax deduction in the year that you make contributions, and then you use those dollars to pay for medical expenses. And because you got the tax deduction, you're effectively getting to pay for your medical expenses tax-free. That's a great way to use it. There's definitely a tax benefit there. But the better way to use a health savings account is to think of it as a supercharged retirement account. And because of that, it's my favorite kind of account that's out there. Here's how that works. You can make a contribution and you get a tax deduction for those contributions in the current year. You can then invest the money that you've put in this account just like you would your 401k or your Roth IRA, and that money can grow for you over time. You can let that money grow, and down the road, you can actually pull that money out. If you use it for qualified medical expenses, it's then 100% tax-free. And once you reach a certain age, you can use it just like you would a 401k, and you don't even have to spend it on medical expenses. The coolest part is you can reimburse yourself for medical expenses that happened in the past. So let's say you go to the doctor later this year, you have a procedure and it costs $1,000. You could hold on to that receipt. 30 years from now, you might be in a position where you need some tax-free income, and you could say, let me reimburse myself for that medical expense I had 30 years ago. So this is a great opportunity to build tax-free wealth, money that you'll never have to pay tax on ever again. The third opportunity I see is the use of a brokerage account. And this is what I call the freedom or flexibility fund. A lot of times clients will come to me and they'll be doing a really good job saving for retirement. They'll be putting money away in their 401ks and their IRAs. That's really great. But those types of accounts have age restrictions in which you can't access that money until you're a certain age. The brokerage account is similar in that you can put money in, you can invest the money in hopes that it will grow over time, but there are no age restrictions and you're able to access this money anytime you want. So when families come to me and they say, we know we want to buy a bigger house at some point, we know we're going to need to upgrade our cars, we'd really like to have the opportunity for a career change in the future. Those things are all on our radars. We don't know how much they'll cost or when it will be. The brokerage account is the go-to account for these things. It allows you, again, to invest and grow your money for some future use, but you can access it before you get to retirement. The next opportunity I see is estate documents. And this is never a fun one to talk about, but it's super important. Estate documents are the documents you prepare that indicate what would happen to your assets and who would be in charge of your children if something were to happen to you. And so in the case that people do come in with estate documents, it's oftentimes the most basic documents. So you might have a will or a financial power of attorney or a healthcare power of attorney, all documents that we want you to have. What most young and growing families don't realize, though, is it's very likely you need a trust. And so many people hear the word trust and they think, oh, wow, that's for the ultra wealthy. You hear of trust fund kids and all these things. And the reality is that anybody with minor kids, it's very likely that you might want or need one of these documents in place. And so, for example, if you did not have a trust in place and you were to pass away, your kids might inherit some assets from you. So they might get some retirement accounts that you had through work. Maybe you had some life insurance and bank accounts, and that money might be invested and growing over time. So theoretically, they could end up with millions of dollars. If you were to not have a trust in place, the court might name someone to be in charge of those assets while the kids are young. But once they reach the age of majority, so for example, age 18, they would have full outright access to that money. And so a trust has a lot of different benefits, but one of the benefits is that you can provide a little bit more structure and parameters as to how the funds can be used to support your kids and at what age they will begin to have more and more access to those funds. So again, very important to have a full estate plan put in place to protect your kids and your finances from what could happen in the future. And then the fifth opportunity I'll talk about is 529s. 529s are education savings accounts, which allow you to make contributions and invest that money over time. When the money has grown and when you go to pull that money out, if you use it for qualified expenses like tuition, room, and board, that money that you pull out will be 100% tax-free. And so this is a great way to save for kids' education in a way that is going to optimize your taxes. The amount that you need to save for college is outrageous. Every time we have this conversation with clients, it's jaw-dropping as to how much you actually need to save on a monthly basis in order to fund 100% of tuition, room, and board. But a 529 is one of the tools that is going to really help you make progress because your money is going to go farther since it will be invested and that your after-tax dollars will be greater than if you had used a different kind of account to invest in, like a brokerage account, for example. And so that's a wrap. Today, like I said, I just wanted to give you guys some tools, some things to think about as you're looking to optimize your family's resources. We love talking about this at Commas. We love working with new and young and growing families to help set them up for success as they work to create their ideal life. And so if you'd like to talk to me about any of these items or anyone else on our team, you could visit our website at usecommas.com and click on the Let's Talk button up in the corner of the screen. Thanks for attending today. We really appreciate you watching this webinar. Again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Take care.